Let's get the analysis and bring in Alon Pinkas. Alon Pinkas is a former Israeli diplomat, writer and analyst. And Alon, thanks for joining us. I consult your work mostly in Haaretz newspaper these days, which is a very quality Israeli paper for those who aren't aware of that. And your analysis is always spot on. So thank you for being with us here on France 24. We appreciate your time, sir. It's never a good thing, I suppose, to think that you can write off Benjamin Netanyahu because he keeps rebounding back like a rubber ball, doesn't he? He's one of these kind of politicians. But at this point, with this resignation, it must seriously question the stability of his coalition.
It does, but before that, I write for The Independent now in Britain rather than Haaretz. So
okay,
that's also
thank
quality news. That's okay. I should have told your producer. Back to your question, Mark. Look, for the benefit of our viewers, Israel has universal conscription. Every male, when he reaches the age of 18, every female, when she reaches the age of 18, go to 3 years and 2-year mandatory military service, respectively. This travesty has been going on since the 1950s, when there was some kind of a political compromise that exempted 400 ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students from military service. That 400 mushroomed into tens of thousands. And this has been dividing Israeli society for a long time, an issue that became acute in the last year and a half once the war began, and the burden and the pressures on Israelis, reservists primarily, but also standing army, regular army soldiers, was immense and unrelenting and still goes on. So against this background, came this crucible of the religious parties demanding, in the middle of a war, Mark, to enact into law their exemption, to codify their exemption, their basic dodging of any kind of responsibility to the country where they do. Don't forget, inside the government, making decisions on a war in Gaza and a war in Iran sit ultra-Orthodox ministers who castigate the state of Israel and refuse to serve in the military. So now, push came to shove, and they decided to resign. You asked a simple question. I went on for too long. There are 3 scenarios here. The first, you implied that this could rile the coalition. It was 68 strong out of 120 in parliament in the Knesset. It is now 61. There isn't one religious party called Shas. It is the Sephardic, the Oriental Jewish ultra-Orthodox party. They have 11 seats. So in the event that they leave, the coalition falters. That's one possibility, and it could happen. But there is the opposite scenario, in which they threatened, they sort of came good on their pledge to their own voters, the ultra-Orthodox. But now Netanyahu will relent. Now he will bend, and they will get what they want, and the hell with everyone else. And the coalition will be saved. There is a third possibility, and I'm not ascribing necessarily an order of likelihood to each. The third possibility is that Netanyahu doesn't care about this, because you have to understand the machinations of the Israeli parliamentary system. Even if the government falls next week, there needs to be a vote on the dissolution of parliament. Then an election needs to be set. Then it's 90 days. The 90 days need to go beyond the Jewish high holidays of October. So we're looking at November. Netanyahu may not care about, he may even welcome, and this is a hypothetical, he may even welcome an election in November until when his coalition is stable. The government cannot fall after it has the parliament has been dissolved. So we're looking at 3 quite different scenarios here.
And it's interesting, and you pointed this out, I think you're alluding to Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the 2 loudest voices, perhaps, for conflict. No,
not necessarily. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir represent the ultra-nationalist right wing. Their voters, by the way, are extraordinarily angry and livid at the ultra-Orthodox because their voters do serve in the military. Both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir's parties, I mean, they united for technical reasons as a bloc ahead of the election in 2022. but they do head separate parties. Both their base support and base electorate do serve in the military. So they are as angry at the ultra-Orthodox as the secular Israelis are.
In terms of what happens next for Benjamin Netanyahu, if it's not that issue, it's still the issue of the hostages is really something that weighs very heavily on his coalition, heavily personally on him.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, yeah, it weighs heavily in the Israeli public. Yes. It weighs heavily on me. Yes. It weighs heavily on everyone I know. Yes. Does it weigh heavily on his coalition? There are no indications that it does. He had ample time in the last year and a half to cut a deal. There was a deal in May that he rejected. There was a deal in July of 2024, of course, that he rejected. There was a deal that was put in place in January, which Israel violated in March. And now everyone is talking about another deal, which, Mark, is also a partial deal. It is not a end of war, permanent ceasefire, all hostages released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, but only a 60-day cessation of hostilities and only 10 live hostages to be released, meaning that it's being kept. The possibility of renewing the war, resuming the war, is being kept alive because Netanyahu now come into the equation. Those two gentlemen, well, not gentlemen, but those two politicians that you mentioned, Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben-Gvir, they don't want a ceasefire. I'm not sure that Netanyahu wants a ceasefire, but they certainly don't want a ceasefire. So he's in a cul-de-sac, if you will. There's no way out for him here, which is why I raised the possibility number 3 that he is actually welcoming an election sometime in November.
Alon Pinkas, we need to leave it there. There is so much more that you could say, I know, but thank you so much for giving us some light on this issue and breaking down those possible options as to what might happen. It is fascinating and an extremely important story. Alon Pinkas, former Israeli diplomat, writer for The Independent nowadays, and as you heard, someone with, well, more than an insight into what is happening across the Middle East today. Alon, thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Pleasure to have you on.